just ad lib here.
Firstly,
so this is
dedication.
For.
Well, I want you to dedicate the shir.
Yes, I'm dedicating the shir to all Cholim of Klal Yisrael, and may they have a speedy refuah, and all the people in the armed forces of the Holy Land, that they should have Hashem's protection to annihilate all our enemies.
Okay, and I also want to have this shir help. There's a friend of mine that's having a double mastectomy. She's not Jewish, but she's going for chemo and radiation and a very serious op. So please God, may she make a full refuah. I know she's not Jewish, she's entitled. Right. She's a good person.
Right. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so I'm just going to have a bit of poetic license here, so to speak. So in terms of davening, there's certain places where you can and cannot interrupt, but definitely if you're in the middle of the Amidah and someone comes up to you, you can't say a word to them. And during the repetition, during Kaddish, during Torah reading, one shouldn't, unless it's a matter of life and death, obviously that's different, but we shouldn't say matter a word. I know in the old days I never knew about this, and I used to talk in shul, and the amazing thing is, you go to Lahavdil, go to a church, and there's dead silence there. Go to a shul, and people treat it like they treat the cinema with more reverence than a shul. Should be the other, like you go to a cinema or a theater, it's dead silent, you can't say a word. You go to shul, they're chattering away. I mean, I used to do this as well, so I'm not judging anyone specifically. I didn't know. And it's not a pub Havdil. It's a holy Hashem's presence. The Shekhinah is supposed to be there. So that's. I'm just trying to see this.
Kevin, something that Damon and I learned through Simcha Steinauer is that specifically during the repetition of the Amidah, that is actually the worst time to talk.
Oh, is that not in Kaddish? Oh, even worse than Kaddish. Oh, really?
No.
From people,
what about the same as Kaddish?
You see, from people talking and from than you, us, and they should know better. And sometimes it's not a matter of life and death or an urgent matter. And they talk and they chatter, and then you wonder what's going on. Surely they should know.
Sure. Yeah. Okay, well done, Kev. Let's get started. We're running out of time for Simcha.
Only got to quarter two.
Okay. So just a quick summary of yesterday. We are on the 63rd daf. And the Gemara asked further, it's fine according to the one who says that the one verse speaks about a thief and one speaks about one who claims the claim of theft by a thief, that all is well. For he has a source to apply the twofold payment, both to an actual thief and to the custodian who falsely claims a claim of theft and was caught out. Okay? But according to the one who says that both verses speak about one who claims the claim of theft by a thief, which we said was the case in the first Beraisa, there's a question, from where is it known to him that an actual thief pays the twofold payment? Because as Kevin read yesterday in Shmot, Exodus chapter 22, verse 3, it stated the twofold payment explicitly with regard to an actual thief that might apply specifically when he stole an animal, because that's the subject of that verse. So the Gemara here is asking, according to Rashi, where would we derive that an actual thief pays twofold even for inanimate things that he steals? Okay, so if you say that it can be derived through a kol v'chomer, from one who claims the claim of theft by a thief, in other words, that is, if a custodian who initially took possession of the deposit permissibly, in that case, he pays a twofold payment for falsely claiming theft, then obviously an actual thief who initially took possession of the article illegally pays twofold. So that's not a question. But the issue is, there is a counter to that kol v'chomer. Because I can count and say that we should apply the principle that when a stringent law is derived from a lenient law, okay? So we'll discuss what that means now. It's sufficient for the derived law to be the same as the source law. So what's the stringent law? Is that we say that as far as a custodian is concerned, when he's caught lying, and it's caught that he stole it himself and he claimed that it was a thief, he pays the twofold payment. And we now know that we apply that to a thief, because when it's talking about a custodian, it's obviously talking about all objects, both animate and inanimate. Then you can take that source law and apply it to the derived law for inanimate objects for an actual thief. But you have to have, it can't be more stringent than the source law. So what does that mean? Is that we've got a problem here, because we would say that just as in the case of the custodian, we only make him pay twice when he confirms his claim with an oath. Okay? So basically, what happens is the owner says to him, what happened to my article? He said it was stolen. He said, fine, would you be prepared to take an oath? Will say amen to my oath that this happened. He said, fine, he takes an oath. Then witnesses come afterwards and say that the custodian actually kept it for himself. Then the twofold payment he's eligible for lying about the theft. But if he never made an oath and the owner of the object believed him and there was no word or main, or he never took an oath in court, then in that particular case, he just had to pay back the principal. So we're saying if you're applying the law of the custodian, where you pay for both animate and inanimate objects, etc., with regards to the twofold payment, to a thief where we have no source for paying for an animate object, then you can't make it more stringent in the target area. So what's the leniency in the source law is that the custodian had to have taken an oath beforehand because he's paying the penalty for lying. So we're saying, well, the problem is here is that a thief then, if you're applying that law, would have to only be liable for the twofold payment when he denied his guilt with an oath. So how then would we know that the thief pays the twofold payment even without denying his guilt under oath? And Gavin quite clearly said yesterday, logically, we all said logically, intuitively, that a thief doesn't get the courtesy like a paid custodian, because a paid custodian, not a paid custodian, an unpaid custodian is somebody, as Gavin said, you trust. That's why you ask them to look after your article. A thief isn't trustworthy. So therefore, he was caught lying, and then the trust factor deteriorates. But until he was caught lying by witnesses, you believe him. Or you say, listen, I'll believe you, but take an oath, I'll know that that deterrent is there. What's that deterrent? If you use Hashem's name, very few people would have the guts to use Hashem's name and swear and it not be true. Okay? So therefore, even if you say, I believe you semi, but nobody would think that a person would be that much of a pathological liar. But we know a thief is pathological to start with. And the reason he pays twofold or four or fivefold is because he's not scared of Hashem. He's scared of people's opinion. So you don't trust this guy. So Gavin quite rightly said, well, we know we can't make him take an oath that he's in the clear before he pays the twofold payment because you can't believe him. So we know this intrinsically, but we still need a source from Scripture to prove that he doesn't need to take an oath. Can you see where we're up to at the moment? Yes or no? Okay. Now, why do we have to apply this oath principle? Because, again, we don't know a source. If you're saying, according to the first Beraisa that holds the first and second pasuk is talking about a custodian's obligation for inanimate objects and animate objects, that there's a twofold payment, and we don't know with regards to a thief. Because when it says to pay double, it's talking about live animals. So we don't know the status in regard to inanimate. So we say, look, let's take the law of the custodian and apply that even with a custodian, who's legal up until that point, until he's caught lying, he pays a twofold. So to a thief, is lying from the get-go, and he doesn't legally have possession, so too he must make a twofold payment for an inanimate object. But the Kal Vachomer can't be more stringent than the source law. The source law says that a custodian only has to pay the twofold if he's caught lying after he's taken an oath, and so too you can't expect a thief to make the twofold payment unless he also makes an oath, because you can't make that target area more stringent than the source law. That's called a dayug. It restrains the Kal Vachomer to the extent in the target area of what comes from the source area. It can't be more stringent. So we intrinsically again know that a thief can't be trusted. So we're saying something wrong here, because what is the thief going to get out of it? And he never pays a twofold and just the principal back for inanimate. But for living creatures, he pays twofold or four or fivefold. How can that be? We know a thief isn't trustable. So we're saying apart from the Kal Vachomer, there has to be a scriptural source to know that even for an inanimate object, he has to pay twofold without taking an oath. That's where we're at the moment. Have I explained it clearly, guys?
Yeah.
Good. All right. So now there is a source. There's a source from the Academy of Chizkiah, okay, which taught in a Beraisa regarding the passage, if a man steals, tra-la-la, and if being found, will it be found the stolen item in his possession, whether an ox, a donkey, and a sheep, live, he shall pay twofold. So if you remember, guys, that was in Shemot chapter 21 and verse 37. And then it goes all the way through to chapter 22, verse 3. So the preceding verse says, if a man steals an ox or a sheep, and then it goes through the rest of the verse, as Kevin read yesterday, and then it ends off with it saying, if being found, will it be found, the stolen article in his possession, whether an ox, a donkey, or sheep live, he shall pay twofold. So that's the source. So it's seemingly saying there that it also contains inanimate objects. Why? Because it's got the word stolen item. If it just had ox, donkey, and sheep, you're dealing back with a live item. Stolen item can imply inanimate as well. So that seems to be the source. So let the Torah state only ox and stolen article, and everything would be included. So now the Gemara
also incorporates. Sorry, Dan. Also incorporates dead animals. It's important there.
Yes.
Otherwise, it will just, because it says live animal, it doesn't say dead animals. So that's captured under that.
It's a very, very good point. So then, how would the person of the previous Beraisa answer it? Because Rav Chias Bar Chaya said in the name of Rav Yochanan, if he sold or slaughtered it, he pays fourfold or fivefold. So how would it answer that? It's the fact of it is, if it was a living creature and you derive benefit, whether it was living or not, it's still in the category of a creature that conveys tumah with its carcass through touching or carrying. So in other words, while it's alive, it's covered, but we learned if it conveys carcass through its tumah, then that's also the classification for the fourfold or fivefold. It doesn't matter if it's alive or dead. According to the opinion of Rav Chia Bar Chaya in the name of Rav Yochanan. Are you with me, guys? So, Gavin, that is a good point. But if you're holding by that,
would a custodian be in possession or looking after someone's dead carcass? Is that what you're saying, Gavin? And
if he takes it home and he slaughters it, then he can say,
that's
it's not live. I can't pay a penalty because it's a dead animal. It's not a live animal anymore.
But then that's a 4 and 5-fold payment if he slaughters it.
Yeah, you still. Damon explained that you're still responsible for 5, whether it's alive or dead, according to that Chizkiah or something.
And a twofold, because a donkey isn't eligible.
Yeah, and the twofold. Yeah, any of them.
Okay.
Minimum twofold. Yeah.
All right. So, all right, guys. So let's just go back to where we were. Sorry, guys, you threw me off a little bit.
Sorry, it's all of us.
Okay. So, all right. So basically, the Gemara is making a proposition. It says, all right, so maybe the Torah should just state an ox and a stolen article, and then everything would be included. Why don't you just say an ox and a stolen article? Because why mention a donkey and a sheep? Because if the ox and stolen item was specified, then you're going to end up on what? A generalization. And that would teach us to include all items that are similar to the specification ox, and you've broadened it. So it means all items that are movable and have intrinsic value. So that's a proof in the Gemara that it's not talking about necessarily living, although Gavin might say, well, if it's dead, it ain't movable. That might be something Gavin's asking, right? But then, if you remember correctly, what's in the category of movable is once something that was once movable. Because, Gavin, remember the three things that were excluded: land, slaves, and promissory notes. Okay, because they're not movable. Slaves, like land, are seen as fixed assets, in other words, from an inheritance legal point of view. And promissory note is different to currency that's accepted the world over. It's based on a person's promise that might not be backed up by assets. And even if it is, it's documentation. It's not intrinsically valuable like money. And we did say that there was a question as far as money is concerned, because even written legal contracts are considered like deeds of sale or property deeds, legal tender. So all it was saying is that you're not wanting it for the paper itself, and then Arthur had that statement on money, which I agree with Arthur. But the bottom line of it is it didn't mention at any point that when an animal died and it was no longer alive, that it falls out of the category of movable into immovable. So it seems to be from Rav Chia, as Rav Yochanan, etc., and these statements in the Gemara, that when you say living or you say movable, you're saying as long as it was in that state, it's covered. But does that make sense? Because when they said he slaughters or sells it, you pay the 2 and you pay the 4 and 5-fold payment. Does that make sense, Gav?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the proof. So movable means if it moved at one stage, it means what? That at the end of the day, it's covered. It just had to be in that category at some stage in his life it being functioned. A person that dies, you don't say that when a person dies, they fail to get buried properly because they're no longer considered human, and therefore that their soul isn't in their body's not entitled to respect. They're still a same category of a human being. It's just that they're no longer in their body at that particular point. So it works within categories. So again, let's go back to the Gemara's question. Gemara is saying, one, the Torah state ox and stolen article, and then everything would be included. Meaning, it would include all items that are similar to the specification ox, and it would be expanded a notch to include all items that are movable and have intrinsic value. Does that make sense? So it's saying, why not just work it out like that? Why would it need a generalization, specification, generalization sequence? That's what we're saying. So the Beraisa is saying that had it been written so, I would say that just as the specified item is specifically an animal that can be offered on the altar, so too any animal that can be offered in the altar is included. So what does that mean? Well, then you've got a problem, because you can't say automatically that you're only including animals that are movable and have intrinsic value. Why? Because if you're just mentioning an ox and stolen items, what is the only thing that an ox would be a more specific category of? Guys?
Ox would be what, a more specific category for an ox?
Yeah, what category would it be? Domestic animals.
No. So I'm saying, let me put it like this.
Yeah.
If you say living creatures, you could include anything. There's two ways to explain. Let's just look at the word living creatures. There's two ways to expand that. Either all living creatures, including mammals, sea-going fish, anything with a pulse, okay, even humans, that's living. Then you could also say that you might be dealing with certain categories that are only mammals and don't include birds. So when you say an ox is very specific because it has two intrinsic characteristics.
Okay, I'll tell you what they are.
Tell me.
I'll tell you what they are. Well, another one I can think of right now. So the one is that you can put it on the mizbeach. You can. So that's the one.
Yes.
And what else is specific?
Well, if an ox,
Kosher. It's
that's
kosher.
excellent. That's why you can put it on the mizbeach. It's the same answer.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Same
Second
answer.
one is the firstborn can be.
Yeah.
Donkey.
No.
The
Donkey is the only non-kosher animal which needs to be decapitated.
Consecrated.
Consecrated, not in the sense of altar, but you have to swap it with a kosher animal.
The firstborn.
The firstborn, correct. So I'm saying an ox has two categories. It's got that firstborn status if it is a firstborn, and an altar status because it's a kosher animal. Exactly as Gavin says. Now, the thing of it is a chicken is a kosher animal. Okay, so why can't it be taken on the mizbeach? And we know that certain doves can be. You can take a dove on the mizbeach. I don't know if you take the firstborn of a dove. I don't think you necessarily do. I think it's only for certain sins that you can use a dove as a sacrifice or whatever. But doves are different to oxen in what respect? I'm testing you guys.
The what's it called? The not the neshama, the
Tumah.
Yes,
the tumah. The tumah. Yeah,
Kevin,
tumah.
well
Thank
done.
you.
Kevin in the West would survive. He's the quickest draw today. Well done.
No, but I'm not as sharp as Gavin.
Today you outshot him. You were the first to draw your weapon.
Yeah.
So that
was it with a lot of purity, Damon?
It was, yeah. It was, so
I was going to say that the first the ox can't fly, and it's a lot bigger.
You win that one, Arthur.
Arthur, that's pretty true. And that's why it ends up on the mizbeach, because it can't escape. That's an excellent answer.
Exactly.
Excellent answer, mate. I think that is.
How do we know it doesn't fly once it's put onto the mizbeach to get up to Shemayim? It probably does fly.
Because the Cohen decapitates it with his finger. He
breaks the neck, I think, doesn't he? He flicks the neck.
He grows his nail long, that one nail long. I don't know if you know that. Anyway, before the animal rights people come to us, it should say that had it mentioned ox and stolen items, the Gemara is saying it's a problem because it is too specialized. You're only talking about either an animal that conveys tumah through its carcass that can be altered, can be sacrificed on the mizbeach, and that's an issue. So then when you're talking about stolen items, it's expanding, but then why mention ox? That's the problem. In other words, you're going from specification to generalization, right? So then, when you go from specification to generalization, does it just go so general that it includes even inanimate objects? So then why mention ox at all? If you want to say that ox is one item, and if you mentioned ox, you would know to pay a penalty on an ox, but no other creature, then don't mention stolen items. because then you think there would be a penalty on stolen items. And if you're saying that stolen items can be living or inanimate or animate or whatever, don't mention ox. So the minute you mention ox, you're taking that generalization and you're taking it so broad and you're pulling it down a notch, but not totally. Why? Because if you have it the other way around and you've got a generalization in a specification, the generalization is ignored and it fundles. So I'm saying to the class, I have chocolate. Now everybody's going to think, Reuven, come here. Now, Reuven's going to get beaten up after school because he was the only one that got the chocolate. So I addressed everybody, and then I funneled my statement to Reuven, which means nobody else is included but Reuven. It's different if I start off with Reuven and then I expand, because the generalization could just be Reuven's class. It might not be everybody in the school. So what we're saying is, if you're starting off with a specification and you're going to generalization, how broad do you make it? So if you say ox, Gemara is proposing you say ox and stolen items. If you mention both things, what could you actually say? Everything would be included. When they say everything, it means similar in that they're movable and have intrinsic value. So in other words, we might, when we say movable and has intrinsic value, we're excluding land, slaves, and promissory notes, etc. But are we including living creatures or non-living? Well, I reckon that movable is pretty broad. Why? Because garments are movable. Are they not? Utensils are movable. So it means it can include everything. But then it's a bit of a problem, because it's saying that if it's living or non-living, as long as it's movable, then you're covered under the generalization and have intrinsic value like an ox as opposed to documents. Fine. So the problem is, you're going to come to a conclusion if you mention ox and you mention stolen items, you're going to come to a conclusion that it's only stolen items that are eligible to be sacrificed on the Mizbeach because they're kosher. Does that make sense? Or animals that convey tumah through its carcass. But there's a problem. You wouldn't expand it as far as saying animals that include tumah through its carcass. Why? I just mentioned an ox. Arthur, why? Arthur, answer us. Gavin, why?
I lost focus for the last.
Just read the question.
Yeah,
just repeat the question. Yeah, just sometimes
I'm saying what's wrong with the statement if I'm saying an ox and stolen items? What's wrong with that statement that you wouldn't include all animals that are living or animals that convey tumah through touching or carrying their carcass? Why not?
Does it say and or all stolen items?
It says, it just says and.
And stolen items.
Yes, and stolen articles. Yeah.
So is the stolen article, okay, first of all, it's very specific about the ox, and secondly, it's referring to, second part is an inanimate object. So it's saying just the ox and inanimate objects, not anything else.
Okay, Arthur's got a good point. When it's saying and stolen, hang on, let's just address, when it's saying and stolen and stolen articles or stolen items, it doesn't necessarily have to be living, he's right, and it doesn't have to necessarily be, what was the other word you said? It has to be movable though, Arthur, because you can't steal it if it's fixed. You can't steal it if it's fixed. But it doesn't have to be living. The problem with the word ox is it's too specific. You can't use the word conveying tumah, because even non-kosher animals convey tumah in their carcass.
Okay.
That's the problem. Why? A donkey is not kosher, and it conveys tumah in its carcass. So does a lion or any other creature. You can't touch a dead animal. Okay, even a sheretz. A sheretz is a dead lizard or a dead mouse. You can't in the mikveh hold that and be fully cleaned. So which means even non-kosher creatures convey tumah in its carcass if you touch or carry it. So an ox is too specific. It doesn't broaden that category. So it would mention ox. That's the problem that the answer to the Gemara is you can't just mention ox and stolen items because it's fine with regards to stolen articles. But then don't mention ox. Just say stolen articles and you cover everything. If you mention ox, then you're saying stolen articles, as Arthur said, that are movable, that are not living things. You can include almost everything that's movable. But if it's alive, it has to be similar to an ox. And what is similar? The Gemara is saying animals that are kosher and are eligible for being put onto the Mizbeach. Now, what other animal is eligible to be put under the Mizbeach?
Sheep.
Sheep, right. So the problem is then the Gemara is saying that the Torah then mentions the word sheep. So why mention the word sheep? It's coming to teach you something else. Because if you know that ox refers to something similar, you're wasting words by adding the word sheep. Because it's teaching you the same thing as ox. So what is the word sheep coming to teach you, Kevin?
Okay, can I just add another point to that?
No. On this
okay, sheep. Okay, sheep can be also sacrificed on the Mizbeach. Sheep. But I wanted to say something about stolen, but we'll leave it.
No. But we have to stick within this topic at the moment, because what I'm asking you is why would the Torah put in the word sheep?
Because the penalty is different. Is that why?
Okay, excellent. Firstly, that for me is an excellent answer. Is that the penalty is different? Doesn't mention it here. Gavin, I think that's spot on.
Fourfold payment instead of fivefold for an ox.
It's fivefold for the sheep and fourfold for the ox. Absolutely.
I thought it was the other way around. Okay.
The reason why it's fourfold for the sheep and fivefold for the ox. That's right, because you get to pay less of a penalty because it's embarrassing to carry a sheep.
The shame to carry on your shoulders.
Exactly. Yeah. That's perfect, Kevin. So Gavin and Kevin, that's a perfect reason that it was mentioned there. But both of those animals start to then fit in a specification, generalization, if you have more than one. So we're going to go through that next time. We've got a minute left. But Gavin and Kevin, that's exactly the right answer.
Can I mention one point quickly?
Sure.
If they're talking about stolen items or stolen, it's not stolen sheep or stolen.
No, Arthur was 100% right. That when you say stolen item, it's anything that's not living.
If they're including it with the sheep and the ox, well, and it can be sacrificed. I think stolen stuff is not allowed to be a sacrifice, so it can't be included. If you compare, if that's what the yardstick is.
Okay, hang on a second. Just one point to clarify is that if you steal a sheep or ox, you still can't consecrate it. But we're saying if it was stolen, it was eligible. We're talking a case of a custodian. He had power of attorney to consecrate it from the owner. That's exactly the point.